The Pink Poodle Curse. My name is Alex, and this isn't a story I'm proud to tell. It's not a story about heroism or redemption. It's a story about consequences, about how a moment of casual cruelty from my past circled back and swallowed my entire future whole. It's the story of how I died and was reborn as something else. If you're listening to this, it's probably because you found a drive or a file I managed to upload before I couldn't anymore. Just listen, please. Understand what happened to me. The first sensation was drowning. A thick, syrupy nausea pulled at me from the inside out, the kind of sick feeling you get from cheap liquor and a spinning room. My head throbbed with a low, brutal rhythm, each beat a hammer blow against my skull. I tried to groan, but my throat was sandpaper. It felt like I'd been dredged up from the bottom of the ocean, my entire body waterlogged and heavy. My eyelids were glued shut, weighed down by what felt like lead sinkers. Prying them open took a monumental effort, a genuine struggle of will against my own exhausted body. When they finally peeled apart, the world was a blurry, incomprehensible mess, and then it focused. I wish it hadn't. The first thing I saw was pink. Not just pink, but an explosion of it, a violent, suffocating sea of fluffy, candy-colored fur that filled my entire field of vision. It was like waking up inside a cotton candy machine that had malfunctioned and detonated. The material was soft, plush, and so ridiculously puffy that it seemed to absorb the light in the room, casting everything in a hazy, surreal glow. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my consciousness. I tried to sit up, to push the fluff away, but my body refused to cooperate. My head was impossibly heavy, as if someone had strapped a bowling ball to the back of my neck. I grunted with the effort of turning my head, and a searing pain shot through my cervical spine. The movement caused something huge and soft to swing from the sides of my head, slapping against my cheeks with gentle, yet somehow violent, thuds. Reaching up with a hand that felt disconnected from my body, my fingers brushed against something enormous and spherical. It was a giant ball of the same pink fur, easily 2 feet in diameter, perched directly on top of my head. From its sides, where my ears should be, hung 2 smaller pom-poms, each the size of a fist. These were the things that had just slapped me. They swung with my every breath, a constant, soft percussion against my jawline. What the hell is this? The voice that escaped my lips was a shock. It wasn't my voice. It was thin, reedy, and unnaturally high-pitched, as if it had been filtered through a layer of cotton and auto-tuned by a cartoon character. The disconnect between the sound I intended to make and the sound that came out was so jarring it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My gaze drifted downward, following the landscape of my own body, and the world tilted on its axis. My world didn't just tilt, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I was wearing a dress. And it wasn't just any dress. It was a monstrous pink creation that billowed out from my waist like a fluffy mushroom cloud. A thick plush fur trim, the same material as the pom-poms, encircled the collar, burying my neck and shoulders in its suffocating softness. It felt like the garment was trying to swallow me. Underneath, a petticoat of impossible volume forced the skirt to stand out at a comical angle, forming a giant fuzzy bell around my lower body. I was a life-size caricature of a child's toy. My legs, oh God, my legs. They were encased in pristine white lace stockings, the delicate patterns stretched taut over muscles I didn't recognize as my own. The lace bit into my skin, a second skin that was both delicate and constricting. And on my feet were the most absurd things I had ever seen, towering high-heeled boots, also covered in thick pink fur trim. The heels were pencil-thin and impossibly high, forcing my feet into an unnatural arch with every slight twitch of my muscles. The fur lining the top of the boots swayed, brushing against the underside of my knees. My hands were just as alien. They were covered in elbow-length pink fur gloves. Glued to the fingertips were long, glittering pink fake nails. They clacked together with a brittle, plastic sound as I flexed my fingers in disbelief. But the most horrifying discovery, the one that truly broke the dam of my composure, was my chest. Resting on my torso, heavy and obscene, was a pair of enormous, perfectly spherical fake breasts. They were like two pink balloons filled with sand, their weight pressing down on my ribs, making each breath a conscious effort. They were so large they strained against the fur-lined bodice of the dress. As I inhaled, they rose and fell, jiggling with a momentum of their own, causing the fur on my shoulders to tremble. The sensation of the soft, artificial mounds pressing against my own skin sent a shudder of pure, unadulterated terror through me. I felt like a stranger in my own body, a puppet in a grotesque play. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, rose to my face. The long, fake nails scraped against my skin. My fingers traced the contours of a mask, a thick, cakey layer of makeup that had been plastered onto my features. My lips were slick and glossy, tasting sickly sweet like melted candy. My cheeks were ablaze with two perfect circles of garish pink blush. My skin beneath felt clammy and pale, a layer of white foundation stark against the vibrant pink. And my eyelashes, they were weighed down by massive, spidery fake lashes, so heavy they partially obscured my vision. As I pulled my hand away, a fine dusting of pink glitter rained down from my face onto the glove, shimmering like toxic stardust. A scream built in my throat, a raw, primal sound of pure horror. It ripped its way out of my lungs. But the sound that filled the room was not the guttural roar I expected. It was a high-pitched, reedy shriek, the sound a frightened cosplayer might make, thin and pathetic. The sound was so foreign, so utterly wrong, that I immediately clamped my hands over my mouth, the long nails clicking against my teeth. The shame of that sound was almost as terrifying as the situation itself. Desperation took over. This was a prank. It had to be a prank. A sick, elaborate, twisted joke. I had to get it off. My first target was the massive fur helmet on my head. I grabbed the pom-poms and pulled, trying to wrench it off. It didn't budge, not an inch. It was like trying to pull my own head off my shoulders. I gritted my teeth, frustration and fear fueling my strength. I planted my fur-covered heels on the mattress for leverage and pulled with everything I had. Crack! A bolt of agony, white-hot and blinding, shot through my scalp. It was so intense that my vision went black for a second. I collapsed back onto the bed, letting out a choked sob. My entire body convulsed. I bit my lip so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood. Tears streaming from my eyes, I reached up again, this time more cautiously. My fingers probed the base of the monstrosity. "Hair, is it glued on?" I whispered, my voice a broken, high-pitched whimper. Gently, I took hold of one of the long, pink, curly ringlets that cascaded down from the helmet and gave it a tentative tug. The same sharp, tearing pain ripped through my scalp. It felt like 1,000 needles being driven into my skull at once. I gasped, unable to breathe through the shock of it. The entire wig, the whole ridiculous oversized poodle hairdo, had been attached to my head with some kind of industrial-grade adhesive. It wasn't sitting on my hair. It had been bonded directly to my scalp. A new, more frantic wave of panic seized me. The dress. I had to find a zipper, a button, anything. I clawed at the seams, my gloved fingers clumsy and useless. I dug my fake nails into the plush fabric, tearing at the neckline. The waist, anywhere a fastening might be, nothing. The entire garment was seamless, as if it had been constructed around me. As my hands roamed desperately over my body, I felt the horrifying truth. The edges of the fabric felt fused to my skin. It was subtle, a strange warmth and stickiness along the neckline and cuffs, as if someone had pressed the dress onto me while the glue was still hot. The gloves were fused to my forearms. The boots were bonded to my calves. The fur collar was a permanent fixture against my collarbones, and the makeup felt like a layer of shimmering, flexible cement. I started to tremble, a deep, violent shudder that originated in my core and spread to my limbs. This wasn't a costume I was wearing. It was a prison. A soft, pink, fluffy prison that had been permanently grafted onto my body. I was trapped. My eyes, wide with terror, scanned the unfamiliar hotel room. It was generic, sterile, the kind of place you forget the moment you check out. On the nightstand, next to a lamp shaped like a seashell, sat my phone. It was placed neatly, almost deliberately, screen up. As I watched, the screen lit up, a notification glowing in the dim light. With a surge of desperate hope, I scrambled across the bed, The movement was awkward and clumsy. The massive dress billowed around me, tangling in my legs. The heavy breasts swayed violently, throwing off my balance, and the towering heels of the boots dug into the mattress. I felt like a baby giraffe trying to walk for the first time. Finally, I lunged and snatched the phone, my fur-covered glove making it difficult to get a good grip. The screen was already unlocked. Open to the photo gallery, a single video file was there, its thumbnail a blurry image of a bar. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I didn't want to see what was on this video, but I also knew I had to. My thumb, shaking, hovered over the play icon. I pressed it. I wish I had thrown the phone against the wall. I wish I had never looked. Video 1. The scene was a bar I vaguely recognized. Loud music, flashing lights. The camera was shaky, clearly filmed by someone trying to be discreet. It focused on me. I was sitting at a table, laughing with some friends, holding a beer. A woman with short, black hair and a leather jacket I didn't recognize her sidled up to the bar near our table. With a swift, practiced movement, she uncapped a small vial and tipped a few clear, viscous drops into my bottle while my head was turned. The video was short, only 10 seconds long, just long enough to show my fate being sealed. Video 2. The perspective shifted. Now it was filmed from the back seat of a car. I was being dragged between two people. My arms slung over their shoulders, my eyes were half closed, my head lolling lifelessly. I was completely out of it. A dead weight being hauled away into the night. The city lights smeared past the window, a meaningless blur. Video 3. The location changed again. I was in a chair, unconscious, in what looked like a salon or a workshop. The room was stark white and brutally lit. A person whose face was kept out of frame was holding an electric razor. The buzzing sound was sickeningly loud on the phone's speaker. They brought the razor to my head, and my hair, my thick brown hair, began to fall away in clumps, littering the white floor around the chair. They were shaving me bald, methodically, emotionlessly. Video 4. This one was worse. The camera zoomed in, showing my legs, my chest, my arms. I was being shaved from head to toe. Every last bit of hair was being removed, leaving my skin bare, pale, and vulnerable under the harsh lights. I was being prepped, like a canvas before an artist begins a twisted masterpiece. Video 5. I flinched, nearly dropping the phone. A person was holding a device that looked like an industrial spray gun, the kind used for paint or sealant. A thin nozzle was pointed at my unconscious face. With a hiss, it sprayed a thick, white substance all over my skin. A faint wisp of what looked like steam or hot smoke rose from my face as the foundation was applied. They were literally spraying the makeup on, baking it onto my skin. Video 6. My stomach churned and I felt bile rise in my throat. The camera focused on my bare chest. Two hands, wearing black latex gloves, positioned the enormous, pink, spherical breast onto my pecs. They pressed down hard. I could see my unconscious body jolt slightly from the pressure. A faint white vapor, like dry ice smoke, curled out from around the edges of the silicone. They were being bonded to me, glued directly to my skin. Video 7. This was the longest clip. Two people held up the monstrous pink dress. Another person was applying a thick, shimmering substance from a large tub to the inside of the garment with a wide brush. It looked like hot glue, steaming as it was spread across the lining. Then, with a coordinated effort, they forced the dress onto my limp body, pressing it firmly against my torso, my arms, my legs. My body twitched again in the chair, a reflexive, unconscious jolt of protest against the searing heat. Video 8. The final piece. The camera showed the inside of the giant, fluffy pink poodle wig. It was being filled with the same steaming industrial-strength adhesive. Then, the two figures lifted the heavy, glue-filled helmet and slammed it down onto my bald head, pressing and holding it in place with unnerving force. The finale. The video cut to a new shot. Three women stood together, their faces obscured by shadows or clever camera angles. They were looking down at me, still unconscious in the chair, now fully transformed into the pink poodle monstrosity. One of them, the one with the short black hair from the bar, stepped forward and waved cheerfully at the camera. Her voice was bright, chirpy, and dripping with malice. "Say hello to the new poodle princess, everyone. Isn't she just adorable?" I couldn't hold it back. I lurched to the side of the bed and threw up. Heaving, racking sobs shook my entire frame as I vomited onto the cheap hotel carpet. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was overwhelming. This wasn't a prank. This was a methodical, sadistic transformation, an obliteration. As I knelt there, shaking and empty, my phone buzzed again. A new notification had appeared on the screen. It was a text message from a contact simply labeled K. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone again. The screen glowed with the unopened message. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it away, to shatter it, to not know. But I was a fly caught in a web, and the spider was about to introduce itself. I tapped the notification. The message thread opened, each word landing like a physical blow. "Kay, feeling pretty in pink, Alex." My blood ran cold. They knew my name. Of course, they knew my name. This was personal. "I bet you're wondering why. I bet you're scared." "Good, you should be." "Kay, you probably don't even remember me. People like you never remember the people you step on. It was just another Tuesday for you, wasn't it? Another person to make miserable to get a cheap laugh from your idiot friends." A memory, dusty and long buried, began to stir in the back of my mind. High school, the crowded, noisy cafeteria, the smell of greasy pizza and floor cleaner, a girl. But I remember everything. I remember the dress. It was for a school spirit day. Wacky, tacky day or something equally stupid. I spent weeks making it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was creative. It was a pink poodle costume, just like yours. A little less permanent, of course. The memory sharpened, coming into focus with horrifying clarity. A quiet girl with glasses and braces. She was shy, always sitting alone, drawing in a sketchbook. Clara, that was her name. Clara Jensen. You and your friends cornered me by the lockers. You pointed, you laughed, and then you said it. I remember the exact words. You looked me up and down, sneered, and said, "What are you supposed to be, some kind of cheap, pathetic poodle? You look like a dog." I remembered. God, I remembered the way her face crumpled, the way she hugged her books to her chest as if they were a shield, the way her eyes filled with tears before she turned and fled down the hallway, a chorus of laughter following her. I had forgotten about it 5 minutes later. It was a throwaway comment, a moment of casual, thoughtless cruelty in a long line of them. But she didn't forget. "Kay, a cheap poodle. That's what you called me. I cried for a week. I never wore a costume again. I transferred schools at the end of the year. You broke something in me that day. Alex, and all this time, I've been learning how to put things together instead, how to bond things, permanently. The glue is a special little recipe I developed, a bioadhesive. In about 24 hours, it will have fully integrated with your epidermis. After 48 hours, it will begin to seep deeper, bonding with your muscular and even skeletal structure. It's not just on you anymore. Alex, soon it will be a part of you, the dress, the wig, the breasts, all of it, indistinguishable from your own flesh and bone. So no, you can't cut it off. You can't burn it off. You can't melt it off. It's you now. You are the poodle, the permanent, pathetic poodle. Enjoy your new life. Princess, you've earned it." The phone slipped from my gloved fingers and clattered to the floor. Clara. It was Clara, that quiet, mousy girl I hadn't thought of in over a decade. She had carried that humiliation with her all this time, nurturing it, letting it fester and grow into this monstrous, elaborate revenge. I looked down at my body, the fluffy pink fur, the ridiculous skirt, the obscene chest. This wasn't a punishment for something I did last week. This was a sentence handed down for a crime I didn't even remember committing until now. She hadn't just trapped me in a costume. She had turned me into a living monument to my own cruelty. A profound and terrifying sense of finality washed over me. This was my reality now. There was no waking up from this nightmare. For a long time, I just sat there, a fluffy pink statue of despair on the edge of a hotel bed. But denial is a powerful anesthetic. A small, stupid part of my brain refused to accept the finality of Clara's message. Bioadhesive bonding with my skeleton. It sounded like something out of a comic book. It couldn't be real. She was just trying to scare me. It was an elaborate prank. And the next step was for me to humiliate myself trying to get help. Well, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But the alternative, sitting here until this costume fused with my bones, was unthinkable. I had to do something. My mind latched onto the most logical, most foolish idea I could summon: the front desk. They had staff, security, they could call the police, paramedics. Someone in the real world could fix this. This was, without a doubt, the single greatest mistake of my life. Getting to the door was an ordeal. I had to learn to walk all over again. The high-heeled boots were treacherous, turning my ankles with every step. The enormous bell-shaped skirt was a major obstacle, bumping into furniture and making it impossible to navigate the narrow space between the bed and the wall. The massive wig on my head threw off my center of gravity, and the pom-pom slapped against my face with every clumsy, swaying step. I felt like I was piloting a faulty parade float. When I finally reached the door and fumbled it open, the hallway seemed impossibly long and narrow. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the heavy breast pressing uncomfortably against my ribs, and stepped out. The walk to the elevator was a gauntlet of shame. A housekeeping attendant pushing a cart saw me, her eyes widening in disbelief before she quickly looked down, stifling a laugh behind her hand. A couple walking the other way stopped dead in their tracks, the man's jaw literally dropping open as the woman pulled out her phone and started recording. I could feel my face, under its mask of makeup, burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the glue. I kept my eyes fixed on the elevator buttons, my body rigid with humiliation. The elevator ride down was a silent, mirrored hell. I was forced to confront my own reflection. The person staring back at me wasn't Alex. It was a life-sized cartoon character, a fever dream of pink fluff and glitter. The garish makeup made my face look like a doll's, with wide, terrified eyes staring out of a painted mask. The sheer volume of the costume was staggering. I looked absurd, pathetic, and utterly ridiculous. When the doors pinged open to the lobby, it was like a stage curtain rising on my personal nightmare. The hotel lobby was bustling with people checking in, checking out, meeting for coffee, and in one synchronized, horrified moment, every single one of them turned to look at me. A wave of silence fell over the room, thick and heavy, and then it broke. First, a titter of laughter from a group of college kids, then a loud, barking laugh from a businessman talking on his phone. Within seconds, the entire lobby was filled with a cacophony of snickers, whispers, and the unmistakable sound of dozens of phone cameras being activated. My courage evaporated. I wanted to turn and run, to retreat to the safety of my room, but my feet felt rooted to the marble floor. I was a spectacle, a joke. Swallowing hard against the lump in my throat, I forced myself to move. Each step was a performance. The heels of my boots clicked loudly on the polished floor. The fur dress swished and swayed. The pom-poms on my wig bounced. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, dissecting my every awkward, feminine movement. I finally reached the front desk. The young man behind the counter was staring at me, his professional smile frozen in a rictus of confusion and amusement. He was trying so hard not to laugh, but his eyes were watering. Can I help you?" he stammered, his voice cracking. I need help," I whispered, my own voice coming out as that same mortifying high-pitched squeak. "Help with what, ma'am?" he asked, the ma'am landing like a slap. This I gestured wildly at my body, my gloved hands flapping uselessly. "This costume, I can't get it off. It's glued to me." He blinked. The professional mask slipped completely, and a wide, disbelieving grin spread across his face. "Glued on, ma'am. Are you part of a convention or something? Is this a prank?" "No, it's not a prank," I insisted, my voice rising in pitch in desperation. "Someone did this to me. I was drugged. You have to call the police." The more frantic I became, the more amused he looked. A small crowd had started to gather around the desk, their phones held high, recording my meltdown. Okay, calm down," the receptionist said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. He was talking to me like I was a hysterical child or a drunk. "Why don't you go back up to your room, and we can send someone to check on you?" Humiliation washed over me in a scalding wave. He didn't believe me. No one would believe me. To them. I wasn't a victim. I was a performer. A man in a ridiculous dress having some kind of public breakdown. Defeated, I turned away from the desk. Just then, a new wave of laughter erupted from the entrance. My heart sank. It was my friends, Mark and Dave. I had managed to send them a garbled text message with my hotel and room number before my foolish trek to the lobby. They saw me and stopped, their faces a perfect picture of bewilderment, which quickly melted into uncontrollable hilarity. Dave doubled over, clutching his stomach, tears of laughter streaming down his face. Mark leaned against a pillar for support, gasping for air. Alex, oh my God, Alex, what is this? Mark choked out between wheezes. It's not funny, I shrieked, my voice cracking with shame. Help me, she glued it on me. Dave wiped a tear from his eye. Buddy, what bachelor party did you end up at? This is epic. Who did this to you? We owe them a beer. He walked over, his laughter finally subsiding into a wide grin, and he reached out to inspect the costume. He squeezed one of the giant pom-poms on my wig. Wow, this is seriously soft. Is this, like, professional grade? The commitment is insane, he said, genuinely impressed. He then playfully poked one of my enormous fake breasts. The jiggling motion sent a fresh wave of mortification through me. Don't touch me, I snapped, batting his hand away. This is real. I can't get it off. They just looked at each other, their amusement now tinged with a little concern, the kind you'd show a friend who is taking a joke way too far. Okay, we get it, Mark said, trying to sound soothing. The prank is hilarious. You win. Now, come on, let's get you out of this thing and get some breakfast. You can tell us the whole story. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand in their world. This was a joke. In my world, my life had just ended. The laughter of the crowd, the pitying and amused looks from my own best friends. It was 1,000 times worse than the physical discomfort of the costume. Clara knew this would happen. This was part of the plan. She wasn't just trapping my body. She was destroying my identity, my credibility, my very self, one humiliating laugh at a time. I had walked right into her trap. I had dug my own grave and jumped in. Back in the hotel room, the laughter of my friends still ringing in my ears, a new kind of resolve hardened within me. It was a cold, sharp-edged desperation. If no one would help me, I would help myself. Mark and Dave had left, still laughing, promising to call me later to hear the rest of the story. They thought I was embarrassed about a prank. They had no idea this was a hostage situation. Clara's words about the bioadhesive echoed in my head, but I pushed them away. It was a bluff. It had to be. This thing, this ridiculous pink prison, was made of fabric and plastic and glue. It could be cut. It could be broken. My first attempt was with the tools at hand. I went into the bathroom and found my travel kit. The tiny scissors, the kind for trimming a mustache, were laughably inadequate. They couldn't even snip a single strand of the fluffy pink fur. It was like trying to cut a steel cable with nail clippers. The material was impossibly dense and resilient. Next, I tried the sharpest thing I could find in the room, a steak knife from the room service tray I'd noticed in the corner. I held my breath and drew the serrated edge across the fabric on my forearm. The knife screeched, a horrible metallic sound, and skittered across the surface, not leaving so much as a scratch. It didn't cut. It didn't even snag. The fur felt bizarrely slick and strong, like a weave of synthetic Kevlar. I pressed harder, putting my weight into it. My teeth gritted. The knife blade bent and then snapped, the broken piece flying across the room and clattering against the wall. Fear, cold and real, began to seep past my denial. This wasn't normal fabric. I needed better tools. The thought of going outside again, of facing another public humiliation, was nauseating. But the thought of staying in this room and letting the glue set was infinitely worse. I used my phone to order a car, my high-pitched voice causing a moment of confused silence on the other end of the line before the dispatcher confirmed my request. I pulled the giant poodle wig forward, trying to hide my made-up face as best I could, and endured another excruciating journey through the lobby and out to the waiting car. The driver, a large man with a thick beard, took one look at me, his eyes bugging out, and then drove the entire way to the hardware store in dead, stony silence, his gaze fixed firmly on the road. The hardware store was a fresh circle of hell. Every head turned, conversation stopped. A group of contractors in dusty work boots just stood and stared, their mouths agape. I was a walking, talking cartoon, an alien creature wandering through the aisles of drills and saw blades. I ignored them, my shame acting as a set of blinders. I was a man on a mission. I bought the most heavy-duty tools I could find, a box cutter with carbide blades, a pair of medical-grade trauma shears, guaranteed to cut through seatbelts and leather, a small oscillating multi-tool with a saw attachment, and in a fit of pure desperation, a container of industrial-strength adhesive remover, the kind with warning labels all over it about chemical burns. Back in the room, I laid out my arsenal on the floor. It felt like preparing for a desperate surgery. I started with the box cutter. I pressed the fresh, razor-sharp blade against the seam of a glove and pushed. Nothing. The blade simply wouldn't bite into the material. I sawed at it, back and forth, with all my might. The only result was a faint, silvery scratch on the pink fabric, which seemed to fade away after a moment, as if the material was somehow self-healing. Next, the trauma shears. I slipped the lower blade under the cuff of my glove and squeezed the handles together. I put every ounce of strength I had into it. My muscles strained, my knuckles turned white. The steel handles of the shears began to bend under the pressure, groaning in protest. The blades, which could cut through a penny, couldn't make the slightest indentation in the pink fluff. It was impossible. My breathing grew ragged, punctuated by frustrated sobs. The multi-tool was next. I plugged it in. The high-pitched whir of the motor filling the room. I pressed the vibrating blade against my leg. The sensation was bizarre, a high-frequency vibration that traveled up my bones. But the saw did nothing to the fabric. Sparks flew as the metal teeth ground uselessly against the indestructible pink material. The smell of hot metal filled the air. But the costume remained pristine, mocking me. The adhesive remover was my last hope. I put on the safety goggles I'd bought and carefully poured the caustic liquid onto the neckline. Where the fur collar was fused to my skin, it stung, a sharp chemical burn that made me hiss in pain. I endured it, hoping it was the feeling of the glue dissolving. I waited a few minutes, my skin raw and burning, and then tried to peel the collar away. It was useless. The collar was as bonded to my skin as my own ears. The remover had only succeeded in irritating my skin. The bioadhesive was completely unaffected. It was like splashing water on a brick wall. The final, most terrifying test was fire. With a trembling hand, I took the complimentary book of matches from the desk. I struck one, the small flame flickering to life. I held it to the hem of the massive, puffy skirt. The fur did not burn. It did not melt. It didn't even singe. The flame seemed to bend around it, repelled by some unseen property of the material. I held it there until the match burned my fingers, and I dropped it with a yelp. The costume was untouched. I collapsed onto the floor, a heap of pink fluff and despair. The tools lay scattered around me, monuments to my failed efforts. Clara hadn't been bluffing. She had created something that defied logic, a material that couldn't be cut, torn, dissolved, or burned. The weight of the costume seemed to increase, pressing down on me not just physically, but spiritually. The heavy breasts sagged against my chest. The massive wig felt like it was crushing my skull. The pom-poms tapped a gentle, relentless rhythm against my cheeks as I sobbed, each soft impact a reminder of my inescapable fate. I was trapped, and every escape route was a dead end. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous pastel-colored hell. I couldn't stay in the hotel forever, so I endured one final, soul-crushing public appearance to check out and take a taxi back to my apartment. The silence in that cab was heavier than any conversation could ever be. I could feel the driver's eyes on me in the rearview mirror, a mixture of pity, fear, and morbid curiosity. Once inside my own apartment, with the door locked and the blinds drawn, I thought I might feel a sliver of relief. I was wrong. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a museum of a life that was no longer mine. My reflection, distorted and monstrous, stared back at me from every reflective surface: the television screen, the microwave door, the darkened windows. The physical reality of my imprisonment began to truly sink in. Not as a single event, but as a continuous, unending series of tiny tortures. The costume wasn't just on me, it was interacting with me, forcing me to change. My body, which I had taken for granted my entire life, was no longer under my complete control. The first thing I noticed was the way I had to walk. The towering heels and the restrictive, massive skirt made my usual long strides impossible. To move without tripping, I was forced to take small, delicate steps, my hips swaying slightly for balance. It was a minced, feminine gait that felt profoundly alien, yet it was the only way to navigate my own apartment. I was being taught a new way to move. Then there was the posture, the weight of the enormous fake breasts. A constant, heavy pressure on my sternum pulled my shoulders forward. To counteract this and avoid a perpetual backache, I had to consciously pull my shoulders back and keep my spine straight. The effect was an oddly poised chest-out posture. The costume was training me to stand properly, like a finishing school instructor made of fur and silicone. The fur collar, constantly brushing against the sensitive skin of my neck, was a perpetual reminder to keep my head held high. If I slumped, it chafed. If I held my head up in a ladylike fashion, the sensation was less irritating. It was a subtle, insidious form of behavioral conditioning. The wig was a constant presence, a heavy, unyielding weight. I couldn't lean my head back against a chair or my couch. To rest, I had to lie flat on my back in bed, the giant ball of fur acting like a bazaar. Built-in pillow, the two pom-poms were my constant companions, tapping against my cheeks whenever I turned my head, a soft, maddening metronome marking the time in my new life. If I turned my head too quickly, they would slap me, a gentle but firm correction. Slow down, be more graceful. Even my voice was being altered. I discovered that the snug fit of the fur collar put a slight but constant pressure on my larynx. To speak clearly without feeling a constricting sensation, I had to pitch my voice slightly higher. My desperate, shrieking pleas in the hotel had been a product of panic. But now, in normal conversation, not that I had anyone to talk to but myself, I found my voice naturally settling into a higher, softer register. It was easier. It was more comfortable. The realization made me feel sick. I started to lose track of where my body ended and the costume began. The constant sensory input was overwhelming my brain. The soft brush of fur against my arms, the tight embrace of the lace stockings, the gentle sway of the breasts. With every breath, these sensations were becoming the new normal. My mind was slowly being rewritten, my original sensory map being replaced by this new horrifying topography. The psychological breakdown was subtle at first. I would catch my reflection and for a split second, not feel the usual jolt of horror, just a dull, resigned recognition of the pink monstrosity in the glass. I started referring to the costume in my head not as it, but as my body. My chest is so heavy today. My hair keeps getting in my eyes. I began to feel a profound sense of dissociation, as if the real Alex was a tiny pilot trapped deep inside a large, pink, fluffy robot, his control panel slowly being disconnected, wire by wire. I was losing myself. The borders of my identity, which I had always considered rock solid, were eroding, washed away by a relentless tide of pink fur and shame. I was no longer just a man trapped in a costume. I was becoming the costume. I was becoming the poodle princess. The 48-hour mark Clara mentioned in her text message came and went. I had been counting the minutes, dreading it. A small part of me still hoping it was an empty threat. It wasn't. Something changed. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a creeping, insidious transformation that was far more terrifying. The line between me and the costume began to dissolve not just mentally, but physically. The constant feeling of the glue, that sticky, foreign presence on my skin, began to fade. It was replaced by something much worse. The areas where the costume was bonded to me, my scalp, my torso, my limbs no longer felt like they had something attached to them. They just felt normal. The sensation was becoming integrated. The first time I noticed it was with the wig. I woke up one morning and the usual feeling of a heavy object pressing down on my skull was different. It felt less like a weight and more like density, as if my own skull had become heavier. I reached up, my gloved fingers probing the base of the giant fur helmet, and for the first time, I couldn't feel the distinct ridge where the adhesive met my scalp. The transition felt smooth, seamless. I scratched at it, a wave of panic rising in my chest. It felt like scratching my own head, albeit through a thick, immovable layer of hair. The wig didn't feel like it was on my head anymore. It felt like it was growing from it. The makeup became a second skin. Before, I could always feel it as a distinct layer, a mask. Now, that sensation was gone. When I touched my face, it just felt like my face, a strangely smooth, plasticky, glittery version of my face. The heavy, false eyelashes no longer felt like weights on my eyelids. They felt like my own lashes. I could feel the individual fibers move when I blinked. The most disturbing development was the breasts. The feeling of two heavy, foreign objects strapped to my chest began to morph into something chillingly organic. When I took a deep breath, they seemed to swell with me. When my heart hammered with fear, I could feel a faint sympathetic vibration in them, as if they were connected to my circulatory system. They didn't just jiggle anymore. They felt like they were responding to my movements with a strange, fleshy weight. They were beginning to feel less like implants and more like a part of my own torso. Clara's words about the bioadhesive integrating with my body weren't a metaphor. It was happening. The synthetic materials of the costume were meshing with my biological tissues. The fur of the dress no longer felt like fabric against my skin. It felt like a warm, protective fleece. Its softness a comfort rather than a torment. The lace of the stockings felt less like a tight garment and more like a patterned layer of my own skin. My body was forgetting what it was like before. The memory of my own hair, my bare skin, my flat chest, was becoming a distant echo, like a dream you can barely recall upon waking. This new form, this pink poodle-shaped prison, was becoming my body's baseline reality. My nervous system was adapting, accepting the constant sensory input as the new permanent state of being. One evening, in a fit of despair, I tried to punch the wall. I drew my fist back and slammed it into the drywall. But instead of the sharp, painful impact I expected, the blow was muffled. The thick fur of the glove absorbed most of the force. My knuckles didn't connect. It was like trying to fight from inside a mascot costume. I couldn't even properly feel the impact of my own anger. I slumped against the wall, defeated. The costume wasn't just changing how I looked and felt. It was changing my physical relationship with the world. It was a buffer, a prison, and a new flesh all at once. I was horrified. Not just by the loss of my old self, but by the terrifying, involuntary acceptance of the new one. My own body was betraying me, adapting to the cage, learning to call it home. The pink poodle was no longer a costume I was wearing. It was what I was becoming. I couldn't stay inside forever. My food was running out, and the crushing isolation was becoming as much of a torture as the costume itself. I had to go out. I waited until the dead of night, hoping the darkness would provide some cover, some anonymity. It was a foolish hope. There is no hiding a 6-foot-tall man in a giant, fluffy pink poodle dress. I chose a 24-hour convenience store a few blocks away, planning the route in my head to avoid major streets. The walk there was agony. Every car that passed slowed down, its occupants staring. I could feel their eyes on me, even in the dark. I pulled the fluffy wig down, trying to shadow my face, and walked with my head bowed, a posture of pure shame. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store felt like interrogation lamps. The lone cashier, a young kid with tired eyes, looked up from his phone when the door chimed. His expression went from boredom to pure, slack-jawed astonishment. He didn't say a word, just watched me as I moved through the aisles. My movements were clumsy and loud. The skirt brushed against shelves, threatening to knock things over. The heels clicked on the linoleum. I grabbed a few essentials: milk, bread, canned soup, my gloved hands fumbling with the items. I just wanted to pay and leave. As I stood at the counter, placing my items down, the door chimed again. A man stumbled in, reeking of stale beer and cheap whiskey. He was big, with a flushed face and bloodshot eyes. He saw me, and a slow, sloppy grin spread across his face. "Well, well, well," he slurred, his voice a low rumble. "Look what we got here. You lost, little lady heading to a party." I ignored him, trying to pay the cashier, who was now looking nervous. The drunk man stumbled closer, invading my personal space. The smell of him was overpowering. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he said, his voice taking on a menacing edge. He reached out, and before I could react, he touched the dress. His rough hands stroked the puffy fur of my skirt. "Oh, soft," he murmured, his grin widening like a little pink bunny. Or a cute little poodle. "Leave me alone," I said, and the voice that came out was a trembling, high-pitched plea. It was the voice of a scared girl, not an angry man. He just chuckled, emboldened by my apparent fear. "Don't be like that, sweetheart." That was it. Adrenaline surged through me, overriding the costume's conditioning. I shoved him hard. I put all my weight into it, and he stumbled backward, surprised by my strength. "Get away from me," I yelled, my voice cracking, a strange hybrid of my old and new pitch. I threw a handful of cash on the counter, not waiting for change, and fled from the store, my heart hammering in my chest. I ran, clumsy and awkward in the high heels, the massive dress billowing around me, the pom-poms slapping wildly against my face. I didn't stop until I was safely back in my apartment. The door bolted behind me. I slid to the floor, my whole body shaking, not just from fear, but from a terrifying new layer of confusion. I was horrified by what had happened. I was disgusted and terrified by that man. But I sat there, replaying the moment in my mind. A toxic and unwelcome thought slithered into my consciousness. For a split second, when his hand had touched the fur, when he had called me pretty girl, a tiny buried part of me, a part I wanted to kill, had registered the attention. It wasn't desire. It wasn't pleasure. It was something far more insidious. It was the feeling of being seen as the thing I was forced to be. My new body had reacted to being treated like a woman, and a traitorous whisper in the back of my brain had noted the interaction with a horrifying flicker of something, not pleasure, but a profound and terrifying moment of identity confusion. I was so scared, not just of the man, but of myself. What was I becoming? The line between Alex and the poodle princess was blurring, and in that murky space, I was afraid I was losing the will to even fight anymore. The days turned into weeks. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment. I stopped trying to remove the costume. I stopped fighting it. A heavy, suffocating blanket of despair had settled over me, smothering all hope. I was a prisoner who had finally given up on the idea of escape and was now simply learning to live in his cell. I developed routines. I learned how to cook simple meals without the massive skirt catching fire on the stove. I learned to sleep on my back, perfectly still, to accommodate the wig. I learned to navigate my small apartment with those small, swaying steps. I was adapting. I was surviving. And that was the most horrifying part of all. One morning, I noticed a plain white envelope had been slipped under my door. My heart lurched. I knew who it was from before I even picked it up. My name. Alex was written on the front in neat feminine handwriting. My fur-gloved fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality, cream-colored paper. The message was short. "Dearest Alex, or should I say, Princess, I've been keeping tabs on you. I saw you gave up trying to cut my masterpiece off. Smart girl. I just wanted to send a little farewell note. It seems you didn't want to play the game I had in mind for you. I had a whole series of tasks and public appearances planned. But you just hid away. That's okay. A little boring. But it changes nothing. In fact, your inaction has made the process even more effective. By now, the bioadhesive will have completed its final integration phase. It's not just bonded to your skin and muscle anymore. Princess, it's in your bones. It has woven itself into your very marrow. The costume is as much a part of you as your heart or your lungs. There is no surgery that can remove it. There is no technology on Earth that can separate you from it. Congratulations, your transformation is 100% complete and irreversible. You are, and will forever be, the Pink Poodle. I'm leaving the country, a new life, a new start. You don't need to worry about me ever again. We will never see each other again. My work here is done. I want you to remember something. Every time you catch your ridiculous reflection, every time a stranger laughs at you, every time you feel the weight of those breasts on your chest, I want you to remember why. This isn't some nightmare you'll wake up from. For you, this is the only reality you have left. But for me, this is a dream come true. Love, Kay. The letter fluttered from my fingers and drifted to the floor. I sank down after it, my legs giving out beneath me, My body collapsed in a heap, the massive puffy dress deflating around me with a soft whoosh of escaping air, like a final dying breath. Irreversible. Forever. The words echoed in the silent apartment, in the silent ruin of my mind. The heavy wig pressed my head to the floor. The pom-poms came to rest on my cheeks. A gentle, mocking caress. The heavy breast pressed down on my own chest, a constant, suffocating reminder of what I had become. They felt like they were laughing at me, jiggling with silent, malicious glee. I gasped for air, my lungs tight and constricted. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the sight of my own pink, fluffy prison. And that final cruel line from her letter, it began to loop in my head, over and over, not in her voice, but in my own new high-pitched one. This isn't a nightmare, it's a dream come true. This isn't a nightmare, it's a dream come true. I opened my mouth to scream, to roar, to let out one final defiant sound of the man I used to be.